We'll talk about a few different tools and techniques to manage source code repositories on your laptop. So source code management is pretty straightforward concept. Most of the people use a tool like git to version control and manage their source code. So in this video, we'll talk about a few tools and techniques that can improve your productivity and also help with collaboration while working with your teammates or troubleshooting issues associated that requires your team members to really understand the location of code repositories and things like that. These are the different topics that we are going to cover in this video, which is we'll give a brief overview of Git and learn how to clone a repository using Git, location of the cloned repository using Git, cloning multiple repositories from the same source code server, and the problem that it creates for choosing custom locations while cloning those repositories. Then we'll also talk about a tool called gitr and see how it changes a few things in our workflow while working on repositories, but we'll essentially repeat the same steps, which is cloning the repositories using gitr instead of git, and see how that basically changes our method to choose the location for cloning those repositories, and finally talk about benefits of deterministic locations while cloning repositories, and also another feature that is built into gitr, which is around opening the repository in the browser and navigating to various paths. So first, overview of Git. There is tons and tons of information on the web about this tool, but it is essentially a tool built for version controlling changes to files on your laptop. Git is integrated into almost all of the code editors like Visual Studio Code, IntelliJ, etc. However, the recommended method is to use Git via command line interface, as it is proven to be the fastest way to work with this tool. So first, let's try and clone a repository using Git. For this example, I chose a sample repository, which is this kubectx repository on GitHub. In order to clone the repository, we have to navigate to the repository on the web and then copy the clone URL, open terminal, navigate to the location where the project needs to be cloned. Now we'll make these observations while following these steps, just zooming in onto the tiny details of cloning repositories. So we are on the terminal, and this is the sample project that I chose for cloning. So first we'll have to copy the clone URL. Once you are in the terminal, first you have to decide where to clone the repository. So for that, the common pattern that I've seen is most of the engineers create a directory in the home directory called code or projects, and then create subdirectories based on the type of code repository. Say, for example, if you're working on a few different projects for a few different products, then there is a folder for each of those projects. So because I'm not really working on any specific product, I'm simply going to clone that repository right in the new folder that I've created. So first I navigate to that folder, and then I use git clone to clone that repository. So I'm going to copy paste the URL from the browser. So I do clone. Now the repository is cloned to the directory where we run the command from, right? Git clone. So if I do an ls-al, I see that one repository is created called kubectx. I can navigate to that repository. Now the current path of this repository is in this location, right? So notice that the location of this repository and the location of the repository on browsers are different things. Because it's not such a difficult thing, we just try to remember the location where we cloned this repository. Now let's try and clone repository from GitLab. This is to demonstrate the behavior of cloning these repositories from different source code management systems. I have to first navigate to the location where I want to clone this project, and then I use git clone, paste the URL that I copied from the browser. Now I cloned this repository. Now I have two repositories in this directory, and where am I? I'm still in code, and I can navigate to this repository, and if I observe the location of this repository and compare it to the location of the repository on the browser, these are again two different things. Now just looking at the name of the repository, it is difficult to really understand the original location of this repository. One way to understand it is using by running this command. You'll be able to understand the remote location of this repository, right? Now let's try and use a different method to clone the repositories and see how it is different from the method that we just followed to clone repository. So there is a project on GitHub called gitr. So the repositories are already organized on source code hosting server. So why would you really want to come up with a new place to organize them again on your laptop? So gitr applies this philosophy, and it solves this problem by always cloning the repositories to the directory structure that mimics the path of the repository on source code management server. So let's see examples of how this works, and we will essentially try to repeat the same steps that we have done previously to clone the repositories, but this time instead of git we will use gitr. So going back to the terminal, I've already installed gitr, and it is easy to install using brew because I already installed it. What I'm going to do is, again, starting from the same point, now I'm going to basically go to the browser. Now instead of locating the right URL to clone the repository, what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply press Command L and Command C to copy the URL in the browser. So now I copied the URL from the browser and I use gitr, clone and paste. If you have cloned this repository using git, then the project should have been cloned to the same directory in which you ran the command. But because I used gitr, it clones it to a different location. Because gitr chooses a different location to clone, if you want to navigate to the location where it is gitr cloned the project, you simply can do Command V, because the location of the repository is already copied to your clipboard by gitr. So I do Command V. I simply press Command V as soon as I run gitr, and it navigates me to the location to which it is saved on my laptop. The good thing about this method of cloning is, if you notice, the path of this repository mimics the path of the repository on GitHub itself. Now this is, if you can simply copy this URL and put it in the browser, and it is guaranteed that you will be navigated to that repository. In fact, gitr does something even better, but we'll see it later. Now I'm trying to clone another repository. So even though I am inside the kubectx git repository, I can still simply run gitr clone and then do this. Now the repository is being cloned. As to where gitr chooses to clone the project, I don't care, because the location is already copied to the clipboard, and I simply do Command V, and there you go. And notice that the location of the project on your laptop mimics the location of the project on the browser itself. Now, a few important improvements from using git versus gitr is that, let's imagine everyone on your team uses gitr to clone projects. Then it becomes very easy for you to really locate the location of a repository on your coworker's laptop, because it's in the same location as your laptop. The repositories are always cloned to a folder called SCM in home directory, which is also configurable using gitr config, which I'm not going to cover in this video. But the repositories are always cloned to the same directory location in everyone's laptop. So that's the beauty. And also notice that there is no cognitive load to choose the location where you want to clone the repository every time you choose to clone the repository using git. Gitr uses git to clone the projects, but it simply tries to figure out the correct location of the repository and keep it exactly same as the location of the repository on source code management server. That is one part of the gitr feature set. Another useful feature that is built into gitr is gitr makes it possible for you to simply navigate to the repository on web by running this command from anywhere in the project. So for example, you are in, so we navigate to say designs, and you can also run gitr web from within subfolder or sub-folder, but gitr will be able to take you to the right page. Gitr can also take you to some of the locations, like for example, Let's see if we can do kubectx. Now gitr pipe should take us to the actions for this project on GitHub. Now running the same command from a project on GitLab. So gitr pipe takes us to the pipelines, but looks like there are no pipelines configured for this project. Otherwise, you would have seen pipelines for this project. Similarly, I can do gitr issues, and it should take you to the issues of that corresponding project. And again, navigating to the issues on for a project on GitHub should also work. Opening various parts of the projects for the projects hosted on like GitHub, Bitbucket, and Git are all built into gitr at this point. That brings us to the conclusion, and to summarize, use gitr instead of git for cloning repositories because of the fact that it offers deterministic locations, and deterministic locations help in troubleshooting issues when you're working with your team member, as I mentioned previously. And the time savings from navigating to the repository on the web browser from command line, those tiny time savings will add up over time, which can be used to do awesome things. I hope this video helped you to take advantage of gitr tool to get good at organizing code on your laptop or quickly navigating to various projects on the web. Thanks for watching.